Welcome to the Canon Cantina, a Star Wars podcast where we ask the question, who is Luke Skywalker before the release of Star Wars Episode 9? How's everybody doing? My name is Jesse, and I'm here with my Star Wars best friend of 25 years, Mike. And we also have some special guests on the show today that we are thrilled to tell you about. We have the two fine gentlemen from the War Starts at Midnight film podcast. And today we're going to talk some Star Wars. We're going to talk Luke Skywalker. We're also going to talk Star Wars films, their impact on culture, and just our personal rankings of the Star Wars films as they currently stand. And I'm thrilled to have two cinema experts on the show today because Mike and I get so focused on story. And today it's going to be a fresh perspective on just Star Wars as film and a little bit less story-focused content. But guess what? We're going to cover The Last Jedi. We're going to cover The Last Jedi's version of Luke as well. So this is a very exciting day. And Mike, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I'm glad we're taking a break from story after last week and Dark Empire.
Absolutely.
I have no idea who Luke Skywalker is or who I am anymore after reading that insane story. So it's good to go back to some movies.
Yeah, you guys bared with us last week through Dark Empire 2. That was a pretty rough time. Hopefully we get to enjoy ourselves for some time with the Jedi Academy coming up. Today is way more enjoyable because we get to strictly talk the Star Wars films, namely the newer films. So having the War Starts at Midnight guys with us today, I'm going to cue it right to Chris, and he's just going to start from the top. We hope you guys enjoy this.
Hey guys, thank you so much for inviting us on. This is very much an honor. I'll be honest, like when your show went up, I was very intrigued, but I was also a little terrified to listen because I figured there's going to be so much deep dive stuff that I wasn't aware of and couldn't follow along. But I've been listening through a lot, and I'm really enjoying the show. So like I cannot stop listening.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
I don't know if you've heard that lament from me on the show, Chris, but my kind of goal is to obviously just explore the story of Luke Skywalker, but to get people that are less into Star Wars than Mike and I a little bit more into Star Wars, or at least they get a picture of this other stuff without devoting the time, you know, this obscene amount of reading books and things.
Yeah, sure.
You don't need to do that. That's a little much, but you guys are here today to teach us about film.
Well, yeah, and I'm excited to kind of, because I think we bring different perspectives than you guys do for sure. And I kind of grew up in loving Star Wars, kind of playing, like I had, you know, my own Jedi council of friends in, you know, in elementary school and that whole thing. We had our robes and stuff. But then Jake,
Oh, yes.
Jake, you kind of had a different Star Wars connection, or a little.
Yeah, not quite as much of a background as you had. I had the tapes back in the day, and I loved episodes, 4, 5, and 6. I remember going like opening weekend to see The Phantom Menace, and I was probably like 11 at the time. And I remember it being the first movie that ever disappointed me. And like I remember being maybe 20 minutes into it, and I was like, this is not good. This is not what I was watching before. And I then proceeded not to see any of the other prequels. So that was all my whole Star Wars experience until...
What an intro. Come out swinging. Jake
my 11-year-old opinion has aged pretty well over the last 20 years, I guess.
Jake, I will say I went to a birthday party at like the opening night of The Phantom Menace, and it was the greatest birthday party I'd ever been to. So I don't know what movie you saw.
I went to 8 birthday parties during this time period that were every kid that had a birthday party had a Phantom Menace. Like, we're going to the movies,
yeah,
and then having the cake afterwards, or before. Some cases
we had cake before, yeah.
I was so excited. I begged my dad to go, and my dad does not like Star Wars. He will watch Flash Gordon 400 times in a row, and he hates Star Wars. And I begged him to take me, and he did, and I did not enjoy it. So,
well, I didn't get invited to any birthday parties. I still got to see it, I guess. Oh, what? No, yeah, let's forget that. Yeah, I saw it at about the same time. But I think I remember liking it, being a 10 or 11-year-old back then.
Oh, absolutely. I distinctly remember going to see episode 1, and for some reason, this is an odd universe we live in, my neighbors down the street saw it like the first pre-release event, like the first like Thursday event. You know what I mean? This is before Thursday releases were a regular thing.
The sneak peek.
And somehow before me, the 10-year-old Star Wars fanatic that I was, and the funny part was we're like, how was it? They're like, it was good. And they're like, someone dies, is what our neighbors said. And we said, oh, thanks for that. And they said, no, don't worry. Don't worry. I'm not going to tell you who it is. But it's one of the good guys. And we're like, and so we start sitting down. We're like, let's think about this. Anakin, Obi-Wan, Padme have to live. So that would probably be Liam Neeson's character. So yeah, I knew Qui-Gon. Yeah, it's rough.
I knew that Darth Maul got chopped in half because when all of the books came out, I went to the bookstore and was like thumbing through everything. And I was like, ooh, graphic novel. Ooh, this looks cool. Oh God, I went too far. And then like
Qui-Gon's dead and Darth Maul's cut in half.
Yeah, I actually spent the entire time in the theater like hoping like maybe it ends differently.
Oh man,
I didn't see what I saw.
Episode 1 stories. This is great, man.
My experience with the prequels is a little different than Jake's. I enjoyed 1. 2 is where I like fell off the and actually like honestly it was sort of this time. Like it was this dovetail of because I had all the like action figures, the Hasbro action figures, and
of course
all of that stuff was really into it. But I think it was this dovetail of like Attack of the Clones is, let's just say, it's the worst of the films. Like,
yes,
it's been said.
Objectively, I don't know how you put anything below it. So there's this dovetail of like, well, I'm kind of
least cohesive film without a doubt.
It's trying to do a lot.
It's doing a lot of interesting things. That's part of the problem.
It doesn't execute particularly well on any of them.
Right.
But I think there's this dovetail between like that being really bad and also like getting into like, well, maybe I should stop dressing up like a Jedi and, getting a little too cool for it. Like it was an easy out, but I vividly remember like being excited to go see Attack of the Clones. We've heard about the Clone Wars for so long. We're going to finally see it. Like I even took like my Hi8 camera and like recorded like me and my friend went the next like Saturday morning, like after it came out. And I have this video of like zooming in on the marquee and it's like, we're going to see Star Wars. We'll give you our reaction when we get out of the movie. We didn't record our reactions because we were just devastated.
Oh
man.
And that's where like my kind of enthusiasm kind of began to wane a little bit. And it wasn't until, for better or worse, it wasn't until these new sequel trilogy films started rolling out that I really kind of got back into it.
I'm with you, Chris. Seeing The Force Awakens, like for all the flack that people throw at it, it made me feel the same joy that I felt from watching the old Star Wars. Not at the same level or anything like that, but at least it did it captured the spirit of the earlier films in a way that appealed more to me as someone who had been turned off by those prequels.
Yeah. Who had been turned off by the prequel you saw.
The one I saw and the trailers for the other ones.
Film critic. Yeah. Yeah.
11-year-old film snob.
And the true irony of that is we talked about this, Mike and I, weeks ago. Ebert loved that film.
Yeah.
Like he gave it a 3.5 out of 4. He said it had a couple flaws, but overall it was he liked the way the plot flowed and he enjoyed the action and, the fantasy elements, which is so interesting.
Ebert also loved Ghost of Mars. So let's not just take his word at
well,
I was curious when we were saying this stuff. I know Rotten Tomatoes is not the be all end all, but it's a start for a conversation anyway. And Phantom Menace is actually rated as the lowest one by critics on Rotten Tomatoes, which I didn't expect. It's at a 55% and Attack of the Clones is 66%. Again, I know Rotten Tomatoes, not perfect, has issues and everything, but that's still backwards from what I expected to see. Honestly.
Right, and Revenge of the Sith is much higher than both of those. Of course it is, but it is. So
that kind of like, I understand the, like, there was the really weird, like Jake Lloyd kind of just like, oh, he's a kid and he's terrible backlash at the time.
Jake's not as bad as everybody makes him out to be, too.
No, I don't think he is. And it's like, it's sort of it's a very thankless job being the kid who got to be the young Anakin Skywalker, you know, like, so
and you're
with
done.
everything
you're tabled after that.
And first hot take of the night, gentlemen, and you're being directed as an actor by George Lucas,
right?
Which is really
actor director,
really tough. Yeah, he is like, I mean, you compare Luke in both like character and performance between A New Hope and Empire, and it's like night and day as far as like the nuance and the what's going on with him, because George directing Mark Hamill is just a nightmare. I mean, and that's nothing against Mark. It's just like he comes off as very whiny. He comes off as very like needy, and that's what the character is. But there's
in that film,
but it's like very black and white. There's no nuance to him at all. There's no like conflict really. You just feel like, oh, he's complaining, which is sort of the Hayden Christensen thing as well. Yeah. Then you get to Empire, and it's like immediately, like from the first lines, it's like, oh, this guy has really like come leaps and bounds, both in character and in the actor portraying the character. Yeah.
So what's your hot take?
That George Lucas is a terrible director. Like I
know, but that's not a hot take, because I think we all agree. Right?
Here we go with Mike. Okay. I don't think George is a terrible director. I think George is a terrible actor director, and there is a difference. I mean, that's clearly part of being a director, though. That's a huge part of being a director, right?
Yeah, it is, but it's like I think you can't build a world like he builds and be a bad actor director, because like he was writing dialogue that was so like you have to contort to make it feel natural at all, and he doesn't have the ability to do that. And there's so much of that going on, particularly in the prequels, where it's just like, it's totally like those actors, I feel just so bad for them. So, okay, maybe it's not terribly hot, at all, but I think he's a great, like, big idea guy. I think he's a great producer like, he knows where all the pieces fit. He's just not the guy who needs to be saying, like, okay, now let's fine tune here. And you didn't say, you know, like he doesn't see the subtle micro pieces. Yeah. It's all big picture for him.
He was basically the first great showrunner, what we would call a showrunner today. Yeah. And that much. He's fantastic 100%. At it, but that wasn't even really a concept then. He would be fantastic at that if he was starting out now. He made this amazing universe, and other directors can do great work within it, but he is not the great director himself.
Well, and in George's defense, he has said as much. He's said something along the lines of, I'm not the best actor director. I'm a great editor and, you know, good producer and creative guy. But he's admitted to not being, like, he didn't go as far as what we've said, obviously, but he's basically been on the record saying something similar. So it's not like he's completely, not self-aware in that regard, I guess.
He's said it's his weakest area, and there he struggles the most in, and he's aware of that. So that's kind of interesting. But
I would argue that he's not a terribly great editor either. In just a and
I'm right there with you, but I was just going off of what bits of his quote.
Sure. Like to me, and this is like totally like pompous coming from like I am an editor by like day job,
by trade.
Yeah. So it's. I shouldn't be like throwing any shade, but like I feel like he's the type of guy who really enjoys and like likes editing, likes the craft and the technique, but just doesn't. Once again, he's very ham-fisted whenever he gets in there to kind of piece the things together. Like there's so much in, particularly, I guess, Attack of the Clones is probably going to be my whipping boy for this. Luckily Anakin's not in it, so we'll get past it. But like in Attack of the Clones, there's so many things that are just like clunky in the way that he assembles the stuff, where it's like you need the spoonful of sugar to get all of that exposition down, and he gives you none of it because he's so in love with the
world building and the exposition.
Yeah. And so you can't be the editor who's supposed to be tactical and who's supposed to say like, oh, we don't actually need this because it doesn't do X, Y, and Z. You need to be able to leave all that alone and say
That's
like,
true. That's
this is what
make the
gets
hard
down
decisions.
to. Yeah. And
editing is almost a work of minimalism. What is the least I can do to convey the ideas that need to be conveyed for this story to work? And Lucas is not a man of minimalism.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and A New Hope was, famously like saved in the edit, not by George, but by his wife at the time, who won the Academy Award for editing that year. So I definitely agree with you there. And to everybody who, was griping on Jake Lloyd not being a good actor in Phantom Menace, well, just wait till you see adult Anakin in the next two movies, because if you're trying to compare, relative skill levels and, performance
Jake's got some
execution and
skills
everything.
for his age.
Yeah.
Well, the funny part about Jake Lloyd is like people trash on him, but like if you look at the rest of Jake Lloyd's child career, like episode 1 might be his best performance. So
Jingle All the Way.
How dare you trash Jingle All the Way?
Jingle All the Way is a great movie, but the fact that it's a lighthearted Christmas comedy movie, it absolves him of so much of the Star Wars weight. You know what I mean? He's pretty natural in Star Wars, but it's like the real question is, did we need child Anakin? No. That's what it is. We needed teenager Anakin immediately. We didn't get that. So should have Anakin been in that movie? No, it should have been Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon's movie. And instead we were split between so many people. But, we could go on and on and on about the prequels.
Why in the hell are we still talking about the prequels 20 minutes into the show?
Oh, I thought you were going to say 20 years later. Why are we still talking about the
20
prequels?
years later. We like seeing you squirm, Mike, in your seat. Well, that's going to lead right into our next question on the show, which I'm going to ask these guys, Mike. We've talked about our history with Star Wars now, knowing Chris and Jake's history, and now we're going to go into the Disney era of Star Wars films. So The Force Awakens onward, and that's created 4 Star Wars films that we have in our repertoire. So the next question I have for Chris and Jake is, what is your ranking, I'm going to say this in quotes, of the Disney era Star Wars films, and why? And, there's no wrong answer here.
Jake, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll go first. So first thing I'm going to say, I have not seen Rogue One. I know it's on Netflix. I know I need to watch it. I have not seen it yet. So I told you I up front, not the Star Wars enthusiast. I really enjoy it. Really loved it as a kid, but not like a completionist by any stretch. But of the 3 that I have seen, so Force Awakens, Last Jedi, and Solo, I would say I probably rank Force Awakens at the bottom of that. A movie that I enjoyed, that I liked, that brought the right energy into it, but definitely the lowest out of those. And then one up from there, I would put Solo. I thought it was really underrated by a lot of people that I talked to. Were like, oh, I didn't think that movie needed to be made. It was a really fun, really good movie. And the more I thought about it, the more I enjoyed it. And then number 1 is The Last Jedi, which I just rewatched this week, and I just can't wait to talk about more and more. It actually made me angry watching The Last Jedi at all the negative reactions that other people had and how they did not enjoy the things that were going on screen. I have so many things to say about it, but I'll just leave it at that for now and let Chris give his opinions.
Okay, you started bottom up, so I'll do the same. And unfortunately, this list looks very similar. So I'm starting at 4. I've got The Force Awakens, and not a movie that I particularly hate. I actually like. I know that The Force Awakens got a lot of shade for like, oh, it's a New Hope remake and whatnot, but that's like not even the best, like that's not even why I go back to that movie. Like for me, it's a great character movie. It's sort of a great hangout movie with like a little more plot going on. It is an enjoyable, easily watchable film. And I think all Star Wars movies have their flaws here and there, and it's not without them. But so I've got Force Awakens at the bottom. That's nothing against it at all. Up above that, I've got Rogue One, which kind of pains me to say this because when it came out, I wasn't like totally negative when we reviewed it on War Starts Midnight, but I was definitely the dissenter of the 4 people in the room at the time. There was a lot that I got hung up on as far as like, it felt like there was maybe a little too much fan service here and there of just like throwing in blue milk and throwing in these things that we don't necessarily need to see. Revisiting it again, I realized that it's actually, I love what it's doing because it's breaking out of the Star Wars mold. and going a little darker, going a little grayer, going in places we haven't been. So I really appreciate that about it. Above that, I've got Solo. Guys, I love Solo. I know Solo's kind of goofy. I know Solo has extreme problems in the first act, but it looks gorgeous. The cast is fantastic, in my opinion. Right. I don't know where you guys land on Alden. I love him, and then you've got Donald Glover, and of course, I mean, I'm a shoo-in for.
We all are.
It's sort Everyone of like
we know that
it's the fun, like, enjoyable summer popcorn flick that they don't make anymore. And then on top of that, I've got The Last Jedi for probably many of the same reasons Jake does. It is a movie that has a lot of problems. I'll be totally like honest there, but I think it's also the movie that is the most ambitious of the entire bunch. If you're looking at it from that perspective, which is, I think, exactly what the saga series needs at the place where it came. Like, it was either, I mean, because with The Force Awakens, it was sort of like, okay, let's get, reacquainted and relaxed and sit in our seat. And then with The Last Jedi, that's the place where you say, like, put up or shut up. If we're going to do anything that gets you out of your comfort zone of, like, knowing about the characters that we've developed over all this time, this is the place where you do it. And it does. And, like, for the most part, I think it works in those areas. It's other places where it sort of falters for me. So sorry, that was long, but that's where I land on the Disney films.
That was great. I'm giving you both the highest possible Skype high five I can, because I like most of what you said. And my list is pretty similar. I've also got Last Jedi at the top. There's a couple things switched there in the middle, but yeah, that was great.
This is what's really interesting about Star Wars, because my list is very different as well. And I feel like this is a good thing with Star Wars. I find this question really interesting with people, not only with the Disney films, but moving on to the rest of the films. I feel like this speaks to the mythology and culture that is Star Wars. And I think what we try to do on our show is we're trying to kind of repair the fandom, the fan base best we can. And I feel like this is a beautiful picture of that, because we can have discussion about how The Last Jedi is not my number one of the new four ones, but that's okay. I still really like it. I mean, it's still Star Wars to me. So, like you just said, Chris, pros and cons, like flaws and strengths that all Star Wars films have, even the better ones, like Empire maybe. So, Jake, I know you haven't seen all of the prequels, but where would you kind of rank the 4 Disney films, or I guess the 3 for you, with you've really got to see Rogue One, especially that third act. I'll just mention that. I'll plug that here. The third act of Rogue One might be the most Star Wars thing ever, and for better, for worse. And it's very clearly, as Chris said earlier, breaking out of the box is more of a war film approach to a Star Wars piece. But where do these Disney films fit for you with the original trilogy? Just loosely shooting from the hip.
You can put Attack of the Clones at the bottom. Just go ahead and
I haven't seen it, but that's dead last.
We all do that. So
obviously, Phantom Menace is the lowest of the low. Above that, I would say I would probably put Force Awakens and Solo right above that, and then working up from there, Return of the Jedi. I go back and forth on Star Wars versus The Last Jedi, because I watched the original Star Wars like relatively recently, and I enjoyed watching The Last Jedi so much more. I love the original one, and so I think I'm putting Last Jedi a step above that, and we can go into like probably a 1-hour talk on me comparing those two. But that's where I'm at today. And then The Empire Strikes Back is the best, and I don't really see how anybody could argue different. But
that's fair. Okay. Well, you guys are film critics, so I think that's a fair assessment. Chris, what do you think if you had to place all 10 films?
Okay, well, I've actually got 11 on my list, Jesse. So,
I like this. No.
So I've got Attack of the Clones dead last at 11 because
of course
Attack of the Clones. Obvious. Then I've got Star Wars Holiday Special because it's better than Attack of the Clones.
Ooh, wow. Man, I do not agree with that.
I don't know about that.
I don't know about that.
Rewatchability, which if you were forced, if you were tortured
Oh my
to have to watch one of them, which one would you watch?
Chris Lee is in Attack of the Clones. I would watch Chris Lee deliver
but
lines.
Lumpy is in the holiday special.
I was counting
I
the
keep
seconds
forgetting
until Lumpy showed up.
Chris has to say Lumpy. It's his thing.
It's interesting because at Salt Lake Comic Con this past year, I went to like the 40th anniversary special of the holiday special, and they had like Pablo Hidalgo from the Lucasfilm Story Group and a bunch of guys who worked on costumes and everything. So I learned a lot about it, and it was cool.
So cool.
But I guess to answer which I would rather watch is, what am I allowed to have beverage wise while I'm watching?
Whatever you want.
How strong a beverage?
This can be a bring everybody over and have a great you have a cocktail hour beforehand. Whatever you want to do.
Consequently, I did do this once. I had a Star Wars Christmas party with the holiday special playing in the background, which was promptly ignored by everyone.
And everybody left.
Yeah, and everyone just came to the kitchen and had the Star Wars themed cocktails, but we could still hear that music and then the various Wookiee sounds every once in a while.
It's got
Carrie Fisher singing or whatever.
Yes,
it's got Jefferson Starship. It's got Lumpy. It's got Lumpy
Lumpy.
watching the weird hologram gymnastics thing. There's just so much going on.
I'm sure you guys heard at the time before Richard Marquand was chosen for Return of the Jedi, they had David Lynch chosen. I'm a huge Lynch fan, so just pondering on that idea is bizarre for me. But I feel like Lumpy was something from David Lynch's Return of the Jedi.
No, like Lumpy is nightmare fuel because they were like, oh, we need to make like more than one Wookiee, but we don't have the budget to make more than one Wookiee. Oh God. Like that's the thing is like, you can still see the woman's eyes behind Lumpy's face.
It's very uncanny valley.
Yeah. That's the thing for me that makes Lumpy so terrifying is it's like, you feel the human inside the costume.
Okay. So we got Attack of the Clones, holiday special. What do we have up next?
Holiday
Episode
special
1?
Phantom Menace. Yep.
Yeah.
Revenge of the Sith.
Okay.
And then I've got Return of the Jedi.
Right.
Which is just
interesting.
Like, and this list I kind of every 6 months or so we
all do
readjust. I got a list out on Letterboxd called Go Rank a Star War. And so I've got Return of the Jedi at 7 right now, and then followed by my 4 Disney films as they appeared: The Force Awakens, Rogue One, Solo, The Last Jedi. And then Star Wars: A New Hope at number 2, which actually rose quite a bit on this last reassessment because I have this sort of love-hate relationship with George as a director, and I just think there's a lot of shoddy things going on. But once again, the world building is undeniable, and the vision is so good that it breaks past all of that. And it's
I do need to ask, when you were doing this reassessment, were you watching the special editions, the Blu-rays, the despecialized editions? So
it was actually the most recent Blu-ray release, but on VOD that I watched it and it came up. I mean, I'm familiar. I have the despecialized editions. Actually, where like it fell at its lowest, I was doing a Machete run with a friend who had never seen, who had never seen any Star Wars films, and the contrast between like just going back to back in a marathon, the contrast between A New Hope and Empire was just so drastic that like it felt like getting into Empire felt like a warm hug after some of the
because that's a frequent description of Empire Strikes Back. It feels like a warm hug.
but just coming right off of A New Hope, it was just
right at the end of New Hope.
Yeah, exactly. There was such a stark contrast, and like everything went up. And I understand there's budget went through the roof, and there were a lot of things added on top, but still just like the kind of core of the filmmaking and the direction was so much better. And so that's kind of where it got to its lowest. But upon reassessing, I've decided, and this is when I was a kid, I was watching these VHS tapes literally every single night, like going to bed, just flipping them out. So, it's almost impossible for me to say like, this is exactly like they're always going to be flipping around. But then I've got Empire at the top because Empire has to be at the top. Like it's pretty much, it's a perfect film.
So Chris, it's funny on that same note. I was watching the despecialized editions with my wife who had never seen any Star Wars period. She didn't know that Darth Vader was Luke's father. Like she was like, is he telling the truth? She lives in a bubble. So
she hadn't seen Tommy Boy?
Actually, she probably hasn't. But anyway, so when we went from A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back, she was like, oh, wow. Like she was kind of like shocked at the quality increase and just everything about it. And she was like, that was better. And I was like, I know.
One also went too from 20th Century Fox, like being like, we're throwing you a line, George. Like, this is insane, to, oh my gosh, we just made the most profitable, successful film in all film history out of nowhere. Give him all the money. And canonically speaking, as Mike and I do in our show a lot, I mean, over 3 years passed with our main cast. So we're kind of led to believe that, like, just by the span of the story in New Hope, that was at most a couple of weeks. Look how much happened to those characters. Imagine how much happened with them in, over 3 years. And all we know is the rebellion's hiding on a snow planet now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing just about the ranking, if you get me thinking too much about A New Hope and how Obi-Wan is in that and doesn't appear in Empire at all,
it does.
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
but like actually,
As the main character.
It makes me want to just bump New Hope up even higher because I love that dynamic, that older master with the younger Jedi, and while you get that with Yoda as well, and then we're going to see getting that with Luke in that role later. I think that is a really great dynamic, and that's something that I really enjoy watching when I watch A New Hope, is getting to see Luke learning about the Force, getting to see Obi-Wan in that teacher role. It's really rewarding.
Ever since Luke disappeared, people have been looking for him.
I'm Luke Skywalker. I'm here to rescue you.
A lot of rumors, stories.
And I became a legend.
People that knew him best.
Luke. Young Skywalker. Luke.
It's all true.
I am a Jedi. Like my father before me.
All of it.
Well, that leads right into my next question for you guys. Kind of the meat of our show are these next little bits. But so with your ranking of Star Wars in mind and all this sort of things, and Luke being kind of the central piece of all the Star Wars stuff, even, the prequels and the sequels are hinged upon Luke in some way, right? We have Anakin, and then we have Rey and Kylo and their ties to Luke and stuff, of course. Now, what does the character of Luke Skywalker, as in films, books, culture, mean to you guys individually, or just, as, I mean, like, you guys bring a film perspective, like what does Luke mean from that angle?
It's not like that was a big question or anything.
Well, for me, like, I'll be honest, Luke was never my favorite character in the original trilogy. Not that I disliked him, but I think it's part of he's the hero in the Joseph Campbell hero journey. And so he's a little, like, I don't want to say bland is the wrong, but he's intended to be a bit of the avatar for the viewing audience. I mean, he's, of all of these characters, he's the only one with like a generally normal name. I mean, Luke Skywalker, but like he's made to be like, oh, I could be that guy. And he's also sort of your well-meaning do-gooder, driven by the best of intentions. I think, like, when I think of Luke Skywalker, especially in the original trilogy, that's sort of how I think of him. Is he's this guy he's always trying to do the best thing. And honestly, like that, he gets his heart in front of his head a lot of times. And that ends up leading to not necessarily calamity, but, gets him into a bit of trouble. That's sort of, I guess, how I would, define him as,
So heart
as a
above
character.
head. Heart above head. I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Eyes always on the horizon.
Yeah.
I think it's like what you said. He's our avatar, especially in that first movie. He's just that hero getting his powers. We learn about the the universe through him. We're working through him. It's in that second and third film in the original trilogy where he starts to get more of a personality. That's when he gets better and better. And he ages as it goes on. Han's cool from the first second he shows up, and everybody loves him, and that's awesome. But we grow with Luke, and as he develops more character, we develop more attachment to him. And I love that in the original trilogy. And I think the defining moment for his character in that trilogy is when he leaves Dagobah early at like Yoda's like, don't leave. And Obi-Wan is like, don't leave. And Luke's like, I gotta leave. And it's a huge mistake. Like, I get it. But that is such a key, like that is Luke. He wants to go and save the day because he loves that much. He loves his friends. He values them. He has to save them. He has to be the hero. And he's just so well-meaning in that, and still really young and hopeful there. And especially when you contrast that to the Luke that we get in The Last Jedi, it makes this really like great bit of character growth in between that, where he still has those same attributes, but as an older, weathered man. But it also, in the reverse, makes you see that young youthful energy and aspiration and all of that stuff in the young Luke in the original trilogy.
I love it. So if Luke wasn't you guys' favorite character, like, did he have a cultural impact on you guys, or like, did you see his significance in like just the world and film? Like him and Vader especially have kind of like transcended culture. Like they've kind of like broken through the barriers of the Star Wars films. And I don't know if you guys have any sort of perspective on that, because like with our whole show examining Luke's story arcs and his character arcs, like I feel like a huge rift in the fan base was, first of all, just something in the air, and it was a bad time. And I feel like a lot of it too is irrational emotional connectivity to this cultural character of Luke Skywalker, the essence of Luke outside of the films in some way. And we're trying to like figure that out. And I don't know if you guys have any perspective on that. So like, to give you backstory, like he is my favorite character, even though I think Han's cooler. Han's clearly cooler, and Han's a better written character. But like, Luke was the character more than just being the hero's journey character, but he's the character that I identified with the most, like being the White Knight type character. And I feel like since he's the lead of the biggest trilogy in all of history, there's something tied to that was fragile, that obviously The Last Jedi cracked open, and in a positive way, but I mean, to shake things up. And I don't know what that is really. The intangible, I guess is what I'm saying.
I think the way I view it is, since he is our avatar character, and we learned through him and we identify with him, and he was always doing good and he was always being the hero. And then we stewed on that for 30 years where he was untouched, and he got to grow in the extended universe, but also in rewatches, and you learn that, you know, how he behaves, and you see him and you see what he does. And we have really well-defined boundaries on what Luke Skywalker is. He is us and the things we would do if we were at our best. You see him in The Last Jedi, and he's standing over Ben Solo with that lightsaber out. Suddenly he broke that mold so incredibly far from what he would have done in that original trilogy that people who had that intense love for it just could not accept that their White Knight could even have a second where he was not that White Knight. Once you've like loved something for that long, any deviation that expands that character outside of where you feel he should be just feels like a betrayal, and you want to, I think, reject that film entirely for that and say, no, that's not my Luke. That's not something he would do. And so it's not just what you see on screen. It's that for 30 years, the biggest franchise ever was viewed through his eyes, and we associate it with him. And suddenly he's doing something that isn't purely justifiable.
I do agree with what you're saying. To take things one level nerdier, to go beyond the films, since we do talk beyond those quite often, like every episode on our show. The fans of all those Star Wars books that were coming out when we were growing up, they are trying not to like generalize too much, but a lot of the loudest critics of The Last Jedi and Luke and everything are big fans of those old book series and comics and everything that started in the early 90s. The Luke Skywalker in those, just to give like a brief overview of what we've talked about so far in the show, Luke got convinced into joining the dark side in one page of a comic book.
Right.
He's, broken with Jedi tradition, and he's he's gotten 3 like girlfriends killed like in subsequent chapters of the same books and everything. So I just find that an interesting argument, because I see where you're coming from if you focus just on the films. Of Luke would never have a moment like that with the dark side, but for that next level fan that's such a big had such a big investment in all those books when we had no other movies, Luke danced with the dark side all the time. So I don't see how that makes The Last Jedi any different. And that's not even really like an argument with what you said. I just wanted to take that, level there.
This actually is a great kind of segue into I have this sort of working theory on, because it's something that since The Last Jedi came out, I've thought a lot on, just in I legitimately don't understand the hatred and the vitriol. And so I've been trying to kind of wrap my head around, okay, well, what am I missing? So the working theory that I've sort of been trying to piece together is maybe it's a bit of this, so Jake and I come from kind of film theory and film criticism. And one thing that we see a lot in films that maybe we love that come from a source material is people saying, oh, well, it's not like the book. Oh, well, it's not like and that's which is a totally valid, observation. But that, example of saying, oh, well, it's not like the book. Oh, it loses this, and this, or it doesn't follow this, is missing the point of what film is actually capable of doing and what it should be doing. So, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of the rift is that sort of mentality of, oh, well, you cut out my favorite little minor detail that I love about not just Luke, but also the extended galaxy and all of that.
Yeah. And I was just agreeing with you in that it's a perplexing contradiction for me, because I agree with what you said about, the film aspect, but the people, they're like, well, I don't like that he went to the dark side this way, but I liked all these other books when he went to the dark side this way.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just don't get it. Yeah.
Well, and that's I think it's Jake, I can't remember who it was that when we discussed The Last Jedi initially when it came out, maybe it was A.O. Scott who in the review mentioned people were mad that Rian Johnson was playing with Star Wars toys in a different way than they like to play with Star Wars toys, which I think is also a good analogy.
That's a very good analogy. Actually, I like that.
It's this thing where, because it's not exactly what I expected, and I totally understand, if you spent literally decades reading EU books and playing the video games and reading the comic books and getting really deep into it, how something that feels like it doesn't fit to you can draw out extreme reactions. But the way that it's blown up is still sort of mind-boggling to me. So to bring this back in, from my perspective, I think what is done, if you look purely at, because honestly, I know Disney is sort of repaving they're not calling it the EU anymore. What are they calling the Disney side of
the new canon?
The new canon.
So all that old stuff is called Legends now.
Right.
Right. And all the new stuff is current, canon or whatever. I guess they don't have a cool name like Legends for it. But
okay. So the comic book stuff and all of it, they're just calling it canon.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Mike and I have had issues with some of that because the new Marvel comics are completely canon, and specifically the new Marvel comics are just the Star Wars line. If we're going to be specific about the main line, we talk about this on our show a lot because we're covering the Marvel line on our show, which is a great way for people to get caught up on the canon. You just hear us talk about the stories, but Luke encounters Vader before Empire.
Yeah.
In the comics.
Yeah, it's a matter of weeks after A New Hope ends. Basically, he has an encounter with Vader. Yeah.
And Vader's you're the pilot, you're the X-Wing pilot from the trench. And Luke's I hate you. You killed Obi-Wan.
And that completely changes the encounter that we see in, Empire.
Well, and that brings up sort of my defense of The Last Jedi and Johnson's approach to it, which is he still has to approach this film as if the bare bones of what you must have as far as information is the films that came before it. Like maybe there is other information in the extended canon stuff, but like as far as cinematically it's concerned, like the language that he's talking with is what we've seen from these characters portrayed by these actors on screen. And I think he does a really good job with finding the sort of driving force of Luke throughout the original trilogy, and then saying, okay, where would this evolve? And I like ultimately where he ends up. Like, I think there's I can buy into Luke kind of shutting himself off from the Force. If you consider that, you know, with the thing that I was talking about earlier of him being sort of the do-gooder who maybe he puts his heart above his head sometimes, that's exactly him going after Ben, igniting his saber for the brief moment, and Ben realizing like that's exactly him being like, oh, well, I must change this because I can. And it's something that's within my power, not saying like, oh, but what are the consequences? And then also you add that on top of like, Ben, him seeing that in Ben on top of knowing what became of his father and, you know, spinning that with the bloodline, like maybe, you know, that might put you in the headspace as well to be like, well, maybe there's stuff in me that I don't know about, like that could come out and I need to just shut it off completely. Like, I think it's a super like bold move to make. And I think it's the mythos of Star Wars is all the better for where The Last Jedi takes these things, even if they're a little harder to swallow at times.
100% agree with you.
People got used to this, as Jake was saying, 30 years of Luke, watching these films and reading these books, and just thinking about this Luke. You know, Mike's talking specifically about the Legend stuff early on, where they take too many risks. They do too many wild things, like with Luke, especially. I mean, you would agree with this, Mike, even though there's things later in Legends you don't like. The Luke later in Legends is more consistent with the Luke in the movies than the Luke earlier in Legends, for the most part.
I'll qualify that with, yes, I agree.
Other than
but it's
Thrawn
been 15
trilogy.
or 20 years since I've read that stuff. So as we go through the show, we'll see if I still agree with it.
But purely on a coolness factor, I think people were shocked because people wanted 30-year Luke after Return of the Jedi, because Luke was powerful in Return of the Jedi, to be prequel era Yoda.
Yeah.
Instead, we got a gutted and weak version of Obi-Wan in the first movie. Like we basically got a Obi-Wan with no purpose. Like Obi-Wan was doing the same thing, being a hermit. He was not using weapons. He was watching over Luke for 20 years as Luke grew from a child to a 19-year-old. People going to that movie wanted to see Luke turn on his green saber, pull down a Star Destroyer from the sky. That's the joke, because that's a thing from Star Wars video games. Whatever it is, they wanted prequel era Yoda. Instead, we got a nuanced and, you know, darker version of original trilogy Obi-Wan, and people were not ready for that.
I agree when you say darker, but I was about to yell at you when you said weaker. But I'll go with you with darker.
I mean, weaker in the way of his use of the Force. Obi-Wan still finds subtle ways to use the Force in New Hope, even though he's undercover in a way, if you want to call it that. Does that make sense? And he activates his lightsaber.
Obi-Wan was hiding, hoping somebody else would fix his problems. Luke took the bold step to decide to end everything himself.
Well, but Luke also didn't have a promising, you know, young child to watch over either. Like Luke had nothing to kind of drive him as far as like,
not after that fateful encounter.
Yeah.
But the decision that so much of the problems with the galaxy for thousands of years were rooted with the Jedi, and the decision to just end it, to get rid of that, like, I think we can all agree is, you know, like cinematically or whatever incorrect, but that's just going with he's a weaker version of Obi-Wan. I think that took a lot.
It did, but Obi-Wan failed in Revenge of the Sith, but it's like his failure was a spark of hope for the future 20 years out with this child. Luke essentially ascended so high, he became a legend, he said, and then he failed at the most pivotal level. Essentially, his nephew, almost a son to him, became the new Sith Lord in a way, and he feels 100% responsible for that. So he says, I'm going to stop the Jedi, and I'm going to stop my use of everything because I'm just going to live in my shame, but I'm going to take all this shame and everything of the Jedi on myself and just be me. And so he had like a different mission.
That's not just being me, though. I think that takes more guts to say, you know what? The legacy of the Jedi is failure.
But he comes back, right?
So let's just end it all. I don't even think we're disagreeing. We're just like talking about the same point from different angles. But yeah, we can go past that.
And we still see Luke being rash and impulsive with good intentions, even through that. He wants to end the Jedi, but not in some cruel way or to destroy. He thinks they are doing bad, and he wants to stop the bad from happening. So
I came to this island to die,
which
to be
I
the
actually
last
really
one.
like.
Yeah.
My favorite Luke in The Last Jedi is kind of like right before that onward, when he connects with Leia, when he turns the Force back on, because we have this grizzled, shameful Luke who's actually kind of, the Jedi probably still are wrong in his mind, but he's also like, I have a power that can protect the people I love. And do I really want to burn down this tree? I don't know. You know what I mean? And it shows that he's truly conflicted, which is more interesting than him being fully grizzled, or more interesting than him being fully White Knight, Yoda, Knight level 9,000, right? So, I mean, I really like that aspect. And of course, we can totally talk now about his encounter with Yoda, right? Yoda destroys the tree.
Well, and ultimately Yoda destroys the tree in an interesting, like it happens in an interesting fashion, because Yoda destroys the tree, which is a, like, basically but it's also, once again, like, Luke thought he couldn't even try to destroy the tree. To go back to, it was a do or do not, and he did not. So Yoda did it for him. But then that also kind of gives Luke the solace that his character needs, that he has fulfilled this thing that he came out to sort of die alone and kill the ancient Jedi religion, while actually Rey has stolen the books and gone off with them. Like, by
Yoda told him right there.
Right.
It's just encoded in Yoda speak.
Right. Exactly. So by Yoda igniting it and Luke not going in, like, everyone wins in their own, like, Luke gets what he needs in the very Luke way. And that's the thing that I think is, like, I guess baffling to me, is to say that, like, this is not the Luke Skywalker that I grew up with, is like, it totally is. He's just older because people get older. Like, if you want 30-year-old Mark Hamill, it's not possible yet.
We're getting close. We're getting close. Yeah.
I'm sure at some point. Yeah.
Have you seen that Captain Marvel trailer with young Sam Jackson in it? We might be getting there.
I haven't.
We'll see the movie, but I was quite impressed with the technology in the trailer. Not that I think it's a good thing, but I was like, oh my God, that looks like early 90s Sam Jackson.
Yeah.
I was quite impressed that they made a Yoda that looked like what I remember Yoda looking like from the trilogy. Like, he wasn't doing backflips with the lightsaber. He looked like Yoda was supposed to look like.
I mean,
Have you watched the special features on The Last Jedi?
No.
There's a whole segment on them going back and, like, finding the original mold for the, like, a puppet from Empire. It's great stuff.
Yeah, and the thing I like the most about Yoda there and about Luke there is that Yoda is still teaching Luke in the same way.
Yes.
Luke still does not understand the Force, even as this old man. And that's the thing I think Yoda shows him the most right there, is they still have that dynamic of Luke is still not the high thinker that Yoda is. He still does not truly understand it. He is acting heart first, not mind first. He's still getting taught. And then with Yoda coming to him there, I think that informs everything he does for the rest of the film, making him reassess everything. Yoda is still his master. Yoda is still teaching.
And Luke's compassion is his strength. Like, that is ultimately, like, the strongest tool that he has, but it's also the thing that makes him a flawed Jedi. So there's this thing going on there, this dynamic that you're just not going to be able to resolve, because that is in the DNA or in the midichlorians of who he is.
We can get it. I mean, that's a whole other thing, but I mean, I can push up my nerd glasses here that I don't have on, but the midichlorians only channel the Force, right? For the Jedi. So that's a whole other thing. Thank God that's what they do. But obviously that was when that came out, people just heard the first word and
over 20,000.
Yeah. Yeah, they're the conduit for which this Force speaks. But so what I also find it really interesting, we're talking about Yoda and all this stuff. Yoda's failed. The prequels are actually a really, really interesting story of Yoda's failure, because I really enjoy Yoda in Revenge of the Sith a lot, because him and Obi-Wan just fail and fail and fail again, and they have to live in it. They're the two people left who live in their failure, and Yoda lives in the failure that the dark side was clouding everything and there the entire time, and he was the only one, but he reluctantly chose to cling on to the dogma of the Jedi. He's like, well, it's worked for thousands of years, let's just do it. But that ended up being the Jedi's entire downfall of everybody. And then we have Luke now, who we've always mentioned this in the past with Legends stuff, but like Luke was already a completely different Jedi to start, right? From what we saw, because unconventional learning, all these things, he was starting a new Jedi Order in a different way, for better or for worse. You know, the rules of not taking marriage and all this stuff the Jedi used to have, none of this applied to, I'm assuming, Luke in canon, but for sure Luke in Legends and all this stuff. And that makes things more interesting, because
we know he got at least one canon girlfriend killed so far.
Right. That is a canonical thing. And because that wasn't important. What was important was, as much as you could understand the Force, right? It was less on the dogma. So what's really interesting is when Luke actually tries to start his Jedi Academy, and it ends in such a disastrous way. His own flesh and blood, I mean, his nephew, who he loves dearly, from his best friend and his sister. And this is the way it ends. And it is very, like before we got on the call, we were all talking about Star Wars and the family dynamic and the Shakespearean stuff. It is very tragic. It is very Shakespearean. And I actually, the more time passes, it was jarring at first for me, the Luke turning on his lightsaber with Ben asleep sort of thing. But the more time passes, it is so consistent with what Star Wars is, which is, the Shakespearean family tragedy, what George always wanted it to be. And that is probably the saddest part. One of the saddest parts.
I have a great sort of piggyback.
But I like it.
On top of that is, so I think you're right in there is this sort of, he's got the melodrama throughout.
Right.
And like, if A New Hope was basically began as a riff on Kurosawa's Hidden Fortress.
Right.
Which very much, I mean, if you see that film, you can see the influence. It's not a carbon copy by any means, but there's a princess that needs to be saved. There's two little peasants who are very clearly R2 and 3PO. And it's just like sort of a fun swashbuckling sort of samurai picture. And then you fast forward to The Last Jedi, which feels very much to me like a later Kurosawa film, Ron, which is all about sort of Shakespearean family dynamics and about how sort of bloodline can conflict and betray one another and that sort of thing. And I think there's a lot of reference points throughout The Last Jedi as far as cinematic reference points. It feels like French New Wave in some places. It feels like 70s cinema. It feels like world cinema in general, which I think may also be another place where people felt a little uncomfortable with it, because Rian Johnson is swinging for the fences and saying like, oh, we're going to take this narrative to places where it hasn't gone before, and you might not know how to feel because you haven't felt this way in a Star Wars film before, for better or worse. Like, and I can definitely argue the worse. But the thing is, with the comparison to Ron, like it just, that is a more mature film than Hidden Fortress. And if you dive into Kurosawa's filmography, like you can see how he couldn't have gone from one to another. It is an arc. Okay. And I feel like we've got this arc in not just Luke, but in the entire, like everyone involved in the saga, these main characters. They've been through a lot of a lot of trying times and a lot of darkness and a lot of ups and downs, but ultimately their connection to each other is what keeps them together. And so I don't know. I feel like Lucas is like an intro Kurosawa class, whereas Johnson with Last Jedi is like a master's level independent study in Kurosawa, to pull out a little bit of film nerd.
Yeah, and not only is it the character's arc, it's the arc of the movie. You can't watch the same movie 8 times in a row and then 9 times in a row. You have to have some differences in those movies. And this is the most ambitious of any of them. And you have to appreciate that it's doing new, exciting things. There's bits in this movie that I think are pure magic, like film magic, in particular when Rey and Ren have that psychic force connection between them. The way it's shot, the way it's done is right in a completely timeless way. It is going to work just as well in 30 years as it does right now. It is completely something you probably have never seen in a movie before. I can't think of an instance where it's that psychic link over space, where they're not trying to show them in the same space until that one shot where they are. It's just a really good way of doing it. And then back to another point you guys were making. You brought up Shakespeare a couple times, and that kept coming up to me over and over and over in this, and how it is pure tragedy. It's high theater, watching these characters all interact and have these flaws and these downfalls, and it's a lot of death and a lot of dying, and that is okay to do that in part of a great story. And I've also got so angry watching The Last Jedi at people who had criticisms this particular time I was watching. I was like, I don't understand. Thing that stood out to me the most is like, I think people would have gone to Romeo and Juliet in the Globe Theater and been like, there's too many dick jokes in here. This is a little off color. I don't think I like what this guy's doing. It didn't fit in with the rest of the plot. Like, they're biting thumbs. That seems really topical for something that should be happening in Verona. Like the whole joke, like, I'm waiting for Hux, like that thing at the beginning. Like, there is a wide range of things that can exist in a great work of art. It doesn't have to be just the tragedy part. There's things to lighten that up as well. And as a whole, not every part of The Last Jedi is perfect, but as a whole, it works as a great piece of art to sit and watch. And it's doing exciting things. And it just made me so mad.
Can I defend the holding for hugs real quick?
I love that part.
Not to say that it's by no means my favorite piece of the film, but it's also right in line with how we're introduced to Poe as a character in The Force Awakens. Like, it starts with him undermining, he's in a very vulnerable situation. And what's he doing? He's throwing shade and jokes at Kylo. So, like, it totally makes sense that character would do that.
People's opposition to that scene is nothing having to do with Poe, because it's completely consistent with him. I think it's just, the tone shifts in The Last Jedi are jarring for people that are used to the regular tone shifts and the Star Wars films that came before it, which happens to be a lot. I think that was more than the jokes, or more than what was said, or more than what the characters were doing. It was the tone shifts that happened so frequently and quickly, right? There was no easing into it. It just,
yeah.
And there's a lot of those in the film, for better or for worse.
Well, and my, just to play devil's advocate, my counter to that would be like, well, the Star Wars is growing up. It's like functioning on a more advanced level, and not everything is landing. Like, there are plenty of things, like, I think Canto Bight is a total, I don't know why it's there.
Right.
It's didactic, and that's about the biggest piece that it brings. Like, it ties into the end.
It's essentially the worst parts of the prequels.
Yeah.
Without the world building that builds the plot of the prequels, because the prequels have elements like Canto Bight, but they are building the plot of this greater Republic CIS Palpatine story, and Canto Bight does none of that, which is
I think the argument could be made that he's trying to lay the groundwork. Well, but he's also trying to lay the groundwork for sort of the outpoint of the saga.
Right.
Like,
which we will see.
Which is we pass it on to the next generation, and it becomes less focus on the Jedi and more force sensitive in general. And it's a sort of, I see it, I get it. I just don't it's not an elegantly approached piece. So like, let me ask you guys this, to talk about tonal shifts and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about the way, I know there was a lot of sort of reaction to Luke throwing the saber and sort of the way that he acts a bit goofy, you know, with his mean mugging as he drinks the green milk and
His,
all of
brush your shoulder off thing.
Yeah.
At the end.
Like how did you guys react to that? What do you think about that as far as, because I mean, you guys, it's a Luke podcast. So like I can understand the sort of abrasive nature of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Did either of you have trouble with it?
Well, the good news, Chris, is with us, we have an episode where we look at Luke weekly. So we wrestle with these things on a regular basis. And I think, like we said with our Star Wars rankings, we go back and forth on some of these elements of, you know, just character and story and things like that. So for me, I still have not fully rested with the Luke lightsaber throw thing.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other elements of Luke are clearly, in my mind, Mark, not Luke. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Mark has an incredible understanding of comedy and personability and all this stuff, but that might not be Luke necessarily. Luke is more naive than Mark in a lot of ways, and Luke is more stoic than Mark in a lot of ways. And I feel like a lot of Markisms come out, and I feel like for better or for worse, they're there. And I'm not talking about the dramatic Mark, which is incredible in this movie. I'm talking about the comedic Mark, because the dramatic Mark to me is Luke.
You're talking about the Mark who played Cockpuncher in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
Man, this is why we have you
I heard
guys
this
on.
week they're making a sequel to that.
What?
Yeah. I saw a thing with Kevin Smith. He was talking about being on the set for episode 9.
Yeah, he was.
And then in that little interview, he announced they're making a sequel to Jay and Silent Bob.
Yeah, apparently Kevin Smith was on JJ's set a week ago, and he got to witness 2 entire scenes filmed. And then he said he came out of that experience saying, okay, I'm finally ready to tell the world that Jay and Silent Bob, the next one's happening. Like he felt ready, like watching Star Wars scenes transpire in front of him. Magic. So I am still not okay with the Luke lightsaber throw, not because Luke's throwing the lightsaber, because that seems fairly consistent with the Luke we see in the movie for the most part. I'm not consistent with the way The Force Awakens ends, and then the way that Rey and Luke's story begins in The Last Jedi is so incredibly melodramatic. And I understand that Ryan is kind of laughing at that, the melodrama there, but I feel like Luke just dropping it would have had the same effect, but in a less flippant way. It would have clearly portrayed the character of Luke in the same way. And Mike and I have had discussion a couple times. I don't despise it with every bone in my body. I can't fully settle.
Just most of them.
I just can't fully settle with it, and that's okay. And then the other things about Luke, we're talking about the comedic elements, they're just almost too Mark for me. They're not bad. I think Mark pulls them off fine. They're more Mark than Luke. And if that's 51% or if that's 80% Mark, I don't know. But it's at least 51% Mark, clearly in my mind. So that's where I'm at on it. And just still examining that stuff, and that's fine.
First off, I believe Ryan was tooling with you, is what he was doing, especially when he threw that lightsaber.
Yeah,
because
I think so, for sure.
Like, legitimately, he probably didn't love the tone that The Force Awakens ended at, and he needed to set that distance. And it was consistent with the character. Yeah, the timing of it did make it feel more comical, and it was totally not what we were expecting. And so I'm with you there. And when I saw it the first time, I was like, I don't know about this, but it's grown on me. And I understand the lightsaber throw. It is a betrayal of our expectations, but it's a betrayal of the character of Rey's expectations, of the audience, of the Resistance's expectations. So it's grown on me. I totally see the Mark coming through Luke in a couple of those things, especially those comedic moments, because there was such a blitz of Mark content like around the release of this. And so you saw him so many times, and then you went and saw Luke, and he was doing kind of the same thing. Probably one of my favorite lines from his comedic side in this is when he's like, no one's from nowhere. And he's, that's pretty much nowhere. But that is pretty Mark. I mean,
Yeah.
That feels a little more like it fits in, like you can get away with that.
That's more of a Han
as far
Solo
as
kind of line.
Right.
That's okay. So, Mike, what's your take on for Chris? Like, what's your...
So my connection dropped just a couple times in there, but regarding the lightsaber toss, I might put this out as sort of a question to you two, like, you know, being like editors and stuff. So the script for The Last Jedi was completed before Episode 7 came out.
Yeah.
But that was just the script. Ryan didn't actually get to see how the movie ended. So if Episode 7 didn't end with that swelling John Williams music and the dramatic faces and that helicopter shot circling the island,
And the tears,
and then pick up
welling up.
there were no tears. And then
for me.
Oh, okay. I thought you meant in Mark, and I was like,
Mark's eyes are just glossy, you know. It adds to the element.
But if we didn't have the movie transition at that point, if we started Episode 8, say with, you know, Rey and Chewie getting to Octu to meet with Luke, I think it would bother people less. And I guess this is like a tone shift between movies that Jesse was talking about, because, you know, it was just built up to a peak at the end of Episode 7, then it stopped. I personally love the lightsaber toss. I also love how flippant Rian Johnson is subverting expectations, because at this point, you guys have mentioned this before on the show today, but, you know, this is where Star Wars has to grow up. It has to, you know, go beyond seeing the same movie, you know, 11 times. And regarding stuff like the lightsaber throw and general hugs, like I feel like I have to scream that at people that started off Episode 7 the same way.
Yeah.
But
What do you think about the Mark isms coming through, the Mark comedic elements?
I heard you talking about them, and I guess I don't know enough of Mark Hamill's acting career outside of Star Wars to give a valid opinion on that. Yeah, he was the Joker and all that stuff, and I watched a lot of that, but that could also just be an actor being directed by, you know, a director who's trying to take things in kind of a new direction. So I don't know that I can challenge or agree with that.
To speak to the kind of tonal shift between The Force Awakens and Last Jedi, I think that is also a flaw of picking, and J.J. Abrams was in many ways the perfect person to pick to kick off a new Star Wars trilogy, but he's more a showrunner than he is a filmmaker, in my opinion, which kind of makes him good for kicking stuff off. Yeah, because
you're talking about the early George kicking stuff off with New Hope and stuff.
Yeah. But the thing that I've always sort of struggled with JJ as a filmmaker is his mystery box thing. And he basically created all of these characters as mystery boxes. And that works in TV pretty well because you've got seasons to figure out and create arcs. It doesn't work in film as well because you have to conclude things and it has to be, you know, very concisely told. And I think that's partially why I feel like The Force Awakens is sort of a hangout movie, because it's like, oh man, we got all these cool characters to hang out with and get to know, but the plot isn't really a plot at all. The plot is just sort of this strung together, like, oh, there's a mega Death Star planet. Okay, cool. Whatever. I don't care. Let's go back to hanging out with these guys. Kylo Ren, he's pretty interesting and conflicted. Let's go hang out with him. Like, that's sort of where I land on.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, Johnson is not given a whole lot of, like, he's given a completely open book, but that's honestly not the best thing to do going into the second act of a series, because you've got very little beyond, like, oh, well, is Kylo conflicted or not, to kind of spool off of and say, okay, this is where we're going. And so I think it makes perfect sense to say, okay, we're going to go really deep into Luke and really, like, finish out, like, basically make this Luke's movie and develop him into what he is throughout The Last Jedi.
Yeah, and I agree, but I don't think all of that blame should go on JJ or even particularly Ryan. Kathleen Kennedy was put in charge of Lucasfilm.
Sure.
And if she knew they were making a trilogy, I think she made that decision to give each director maybe a little too much autonomy for each movie. It was a bold decision, and I've liked what we've gotten so far, but yeah, if you're looking for a more cohesive story across 3 movies, maybe you should have outlined all 3 movies, a little more than they did.
That's good. Something we could close on with The Last Jedi is the final act and how it ends with the confrontation between Luke and Kylo, which ultimately is my favorite part of the entire film and my favorite Luke part of the entire film, because essentially Luke fulfills the role of the old Luke and the new Luke. And they kind of coincide they just kind of transform together to me. And he kind of fulfills the ultimate sacrifice. We mentioned Luke as Obi-Wan in this, not Yoda. And I feel like that's fulfilled, but I want to know what you guys' thoughts are on the final act of the film. The Crate Planet Onward finale.
I really liked the way Luke's force apparition, or whatever we want to call it, force projection, that whole thing went. From start to finish, I loved how he showed up. I loved how he looked like the last time Kylo Ren had seen him. I love how he goes out there, the high drama that is him standing there, dodging, and then just the way the whole thing progresses. I think it's perfect. I love every note of it, and I think it's picture perfect, with the possible exception being the shoulder brush off thing, which is, right. I probably would have omitted that, but other than that, I think it's basically tonally perfect and everything. But what I like the most about it is how consistent it is with his character to come in and save the day, and how he's playing the role sort of at the beginning of the movie of graphic novel Old Man Logan. So something terrible has happened, and Logan says, I'm never popping the claws again. I'm a pacifist. That's it. Spoilers at the end. He pops the claws again. But what I like, so I hate to say it, but what I like so much about Luke Skywalker is he's sworn that off, and then he is able to have that ultimate sacrifice, save the day for everybody, allow everybody to escape without having to pop the claws again. He does no violence there. He's using the Force to save the day, not inflict pain or damage or killing, and he's not taking a laser sword and just slashing the bad guys. Right. His word, not mine. I would call it a lightsaber, but regardless.
Well, yeah, and he, it's sort of the perfect conclusion to Luke Skywalker's story as well. Not to say that we're not going to see him in 9, because I'm sure we'll see him in 9, but this is finally, he puts his head in front of his heart, and maybe because they both converge as well, but right. He generally would not have the fortitude to say, wait a second, what's the best way that I could possibly use my energy to handle this? It's not running to save them. It's actually being there by not being there and creating a diversion, which is something we've never seen him do before. And it takes that sort of arc. It feels like an arc because it feels like something new, and not in a way that feels jarring, but in a way that feels very complete in, that character has finally reached, even after all of this time, he still had things to learn. And, there's a lot going on in the thematics of this film as far as futility versus embracing failure and learning from failure. And I think Luke is very much finally learning to embrace the failure and then look at, kind of say, okay, let's take a second. Let's look at it. Let's see how I can figure out the best way to do this, versus something like, and I don't know, I've seen on people kind of spouting Kylo's, speech in the throne room as the sort of thesis of this film, which I don't fully understand, as far as leave it all behind, let it burn. I feel like people think that's what is being said in the film. And I feel like they're totally missing the point of, it's very easy to say, let it burn. It's much harder to say, okay, well, instead, let's actually use, these ashes mean something. Figuring out how to take, the one flaw, the really the defining flaw of Luke Skywalker. And finally he figures out how to put his head in the place where it needs to be to make the ultimate Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, the emotional.
Well, but also he is the
White
Knight that he has always wanted to be, because he's finally able to get over his biggest character flaw. And that's so satisfying.
Yeah. And the line from the movie that I wrote down that I think summed up so many things, we could take it at a couple different levels, is where Luke told Rey, what did you think was going to happen here? Like, realistically, Rey wanted him to just go and be Superman, but he wasn't. He had grown as a character. What did you expect Luke to be 30 years down the road? Hopefully he's grown. Hopefully he is the pacifist. Hopefully he's thinking first at this point and not just still killing bad guys every single day. But also, what did we think was going to happen here as far as, do you want to see the same exact thing like we saw with JJ, where we see the same characters doing the same thing? What did you think was going to happen here? A betrayal of expectations. We get what Ryan gives us. What did we think for just fan expectations for what Luke was going to be? What did you think was going to happen here? No, it's going to be different. Things have changed. Time has passed. I'm not the man I was before. And so I think that all kind of comes together to just show, what did you expect to happen here? Probably none of us would have guessed Luke was just going to fade into the Force after an ultimate pacifist sacrifice. None of us were going to expect that, but it's what the character deserves to have happen after this arc. And I thought it was great.
You might need to go into witness protection after some of these angry Star Wars fans.
Oh, man. Excellent.
Not from us.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
I know.
Right. So that's The Last Jedi, guys. Obviously, there's a lot we didn't talk about, like Rey and Kylo, which have their own strengths and problems.
Porgs.
Chewie and the
this internet
Porgs.
sensation that Mike just absolutely adores called Reylo.
Shipping.
I will hit you next time I see you.
Hit me over Skype. There it is. Luckily, you guys being film guys, you're probably less privy to some of that.
Shipping is not nonsense. I just happen to disagree with this particular one. Let's not paint me out to be a super angry.
No, I'm not saying shipping is bad. I'm saying this sort of like hive mindset of just like getting so behind a fan theory. You know what I'm saying, Mike? Like a lot of our show is not doing that. A lot of our show is waiting and seeing or just examining the text we have. The Reylo thing, it's based in credibility in a lot of ways, but it's taken off way past it. It can stop. It can't stop now. And I don't know what that means for the Star Wars fans.
At this point, someone has lit the kindling already. And so if like, that's not where it goes, there will be a subsect of fans that are just upset because they've been
something didn't happen.
They've set their sights on like, this is what I want.
So we'll see the same thing again, right?
Yeah. From a different perspective. Well, something that I like in just mass media like Star Wars, like comic books, these sorts of things. I like the messiness, and I think we should embrace the messiness. We should embrace the fact that like we can have the EU or the Legends and have the canon, and they can coexist even if they conflict with each other. And you can say, well, this is my favorite. Like one of my favorite things is like, oh, well, I really like when Batman is X, Y, and Z. Right. I'm not really into this other, I'm not into 90s Batman who's super like macho and like Frank Miller Batman. That's not my thing. Like if you want Frank Miller Batman, you can have him. Like I've got mine, you've got yours. Cool.
I like that. Yeah.
Just, and that's the thing is like, I think we all need to embrace the fact that this thing is bigger than all of us.
Totally.
And it's like, it's impossible to contain in one solid, even if Disney is trying their damnedest to do it between the films and the comic books and the books and the television series coming out and all of that, there's still going to be loose threads, or there's still going to be things that people really liked about the old stuff that doesn't get brought in. And like, it's cool. You still got it. It's not erased. It's just on another plane. Be cool, man.
Be cool, man.
That's great.
I think that's a great place to stop this part of our discussion. that's essentially Mike and I's goal of this entire podcast, is just to, critically and enjoyably, hopefully, go through Luke's entire arc and just see what happens, because we're already seeing a lot of consistencies and inconsistencies all the way to The Last Jedi, and that's worthwhile in some ways. In other ways it's a little gratuitous, but
it is a daunting
through.
task that you guys have taken on.
Yeah, I don't know that we knew exactly what we were getting into when we started.
But that's also sort of the enjoyable, that's why I'm kind of hooked, is it's just one, there are things that I haven't picked up since I was in middle school that you guys are going over, where it's oh yeah,
right.
I remember, but I've forgotten so much about
nostalgia hit.
Yeah. But then also I appreciate the way you guys are approaching the material, and even the stuff that you don't like, you're okay, but what is it and why is it? Right. And I really like that, because I think fandom needs more of that cool-headed approach. And
I think it's a hard task too, because Luke Skywalker is at the level of a modern Hamlet or something, but written by 50 authors in 5 different mediums. How do you even go and reconcile that? But he's still a titan that we all are aware of. We all know, we all have preconceived notions of what Luke Skywalker is, except for my wife, who has no clue.
She knows now. She's learning, which I'm
a little bit.
About.
She doesn't know who his sister is, though, and I've had to stop people from telling her.
Wonderful. So you guys are about to watch?
Yeah. We're about to watch.
You've helped protect that bubble.
I'll be curious to hear what her favorite film is after all this is said and done.
Yeah, I'm curious to see if we're gonna watch Attack of the Clones.
It might be. Tell her there's a strange reference to noir French Connection sort of stuff with an entire Obi-Wan subplot.
It tries so hard to do a weird mystery thing that noir. Just doesn't work at all. And then there's oh my god, and then there's the death sticks. Oh, that movie.
You want to buy some death sticks?
You guys are not convincing me to watch this film, just so you know.
We started at the beginning. The only thing I tried to convince you of was watching the third one.
All right.
And I stand by that statement. You could just, as Mike said, take 2 minutes to read the synopsis of the second one and just jump right into Revenge of the Sith.
Start with Rogue One and see how you feel.
Sure. Right. I'm doing that one for sure.
Rogue One first.
Love it.
Maybe we need a new order where you go chronologically, but when you get to Attack of the Clones, you just watch the battle forward, the last 20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. The battle saber fight, which is relevant.
Yeah.
On another episode, we can talk about how that's the way you should watch Rogue One.
Oh, burn, Mike.
Now that's
Mike. Tell them about your thoughts on the third act of Rogue One. Even though, despite you hating the first and second act, maybe not hating, but just
I don't hate. I like Rogue One. I'm just saying that the last third is some of the best Star Wars ever. And
listen to that. Listen to this man. He said that.
I mean, I wouldn't say they're not good. I think Cassian is the shining star to come 100%. Out of that.
Yes, and that's why he's getting his own series. Everybody else is.
Yeah, the second act is better than the first, and
the pacing of the first act is terrible. I honestly feel like the pacing would feel a little better if they weren't oh, we gotta tell you where you are and what it is every single time we go to another planet. That's never happened in Star Wars before. We just figure that shit out.
They were trying to distinguish it, I think, from the saga stuff a little too much in that way. There's already fan edits, of course, where the planet names are removed to give you an example of that.
Right? Of course. So, for better or for worse.
Fans are the worst.
They exist. It's a whole nother thing. So now that we've had a fairly extensive and, jumping around, which I think is hopefully exciting for you guys at home listening, Star Wars discussion. The real question is, these two gentlemen that are on podcast today, where can we find you guys and where can we find your show?
Well, you can find sort of everything that we do at warstartsmidnight.com. Right now, we're actually wrapping up a long series that we've been doing for about 1.5 years now on the entire filmography of John Carpenter. So we've got an episode. We're in sort of the dark days of John Carpenter at this point. I think we're past the worst of it, which is
Vampires.
But yeah, vampires is rough. We got an episode of Ghosts of Mars coming out, which Roger Ebert gave 3 out of 4 stars. I'll tell you that.
So 0.5 less than The Phantom Menace. Let's
right.
A film that is worse than The Phantom Menace, according to Ebert.
I'm not listening to this 11-year-old critic over here.
But we've got a lot of great content there. If you're a fan of John Carpenter, I mean, discussing The Thing, They Live, all the great 70s and 80s stuff.
The classics.
Some really great gems. And also, like, I would encourage you to kind of, if you're a Carpenter fan but haven't kind of jumped into some of his older stuff, like, there's a lot of great stuff that we've found. Like, I would say probably In the Mouth of Madness is the one that I just cannot believe no one is talking about this movie, or at least no one outside of like the known, you know, like those in the horror film communities know, but like it hasn't reached its The Thing moment yet. And I really, truly believe it deserves it.
That's a favorite short story of mine, being a Lovecraft nut that I am. Mm-hmm. Well, we talked about earlier the difference between film and books. The decisions he makes to make that his own work are so interesting. Interesting. And they're not that sort of thing where you're like, well, it's nothing like Lovecraft's book. It's actually positive. It makes it a fun film. The decisions he changed. So that's exciting for me.
And that's sort of like, I mean, what we explore in the Carpenter stuff is it's been really great to go through his filmography and kind of see how he's grown as a filmmaker and what like his touchstones are. Yeah, I encourage you, go check those out. More rarely now, but we also do sort of movie reviews of either current films out or stuff. We do a lot of reviews of films that we call our war crimes, basically films that we're ashamed to say that we haven't seen. So for you arty folks out there, we've got a review of Jake. Jake, do you want to do the title for me?
Oh yeah. Au revoir, les enfants.
Yes, the Louis Malle film coming up pretty soon as well. So yeah, check us out, warshotmidnight.com. You can also, I'm fairly active on our Twitter at WSAMpod. And you can find us on other social media as well, but that's sort of the main place that we're hanging out. Say hi. If you want to discuss film, hit us up. We'll definitely engage, and we love a good chat.
Chris is probably too humble to mention this, but our tweet getting liked by Ryan Johnson was, in my mind, dwarfed by Chris's solo trailer getting retweeted by Topher Grace.
You shut your whore mouth.
Mike has that a giant picture on his wall of our tweet. The like Ryan Johnson
and Brian Glazer
painted
as
on
well.
the wall.
Chris did if you guys have probably seen it potentially on YouTube, a solo trailer.
It was a re-edit. So basically, here's the thing: when the first solo trailer came out, I was pretty like kind of it was meh. I didn't really like it.
Is that the one that started with like the Led Zeppelin
close
guitar,
like the Led Zeppelin, but from a stock music site?
Yeah. It was that trailer. Yeah, okay.
The thing is that it just felt like the way that they presented Han, I couldn't like break from my mind. I was like, it feels like it's just James Kirk from the first Star Trek, the first JJ Star Trek.
Right.
So I did the easiest possible thing that you could do, and I recut the thing to Sabotage by Beastie Boys. Then it like somehow like took off in a really weird way. Like for like a week and a half, I was getting like tweeted at by like Midwestern radio stations, and when Gulf Magazine picked it up, I knew it had hit peak saturation. It was a very weird sort of thing. And I mean, and the thing is that like I understand, like it's the silliest, stupid, like it's a very like it basically the edit made itself. So feel free to also throw shade at me at WSAMpod and tell me that I made a very unoriginal sort of, because I think, you know, people did it with Rogue One, and I don't know. My point was just like, oh, this solo trailer looks a lot like James Kirk. Hope it's not that. And luckily it wasn't that. And so I was actually like, as down as I was on that first trailer, I actually enjoyed the movie quite a bit.
Sound like you enjoyed it a lot. Yeah.
But you glossed over the weirdest part. Topher Grace was ground floor. Like, Topher Grace was like 2 hours into it being released. Topher Grace is retweeting it. Like, he was just browsing the internet looking for solo trailers.
That's the best part.
He totally was. It was like a couple hundred views maybe, and he's tweeting directly at me, which was like, that was the other thing is like I connected the podcast to it because I was like, oh, we got a movie podcast. And he found like in the description that like, it said I edited it, found my unlisted Twitter handle and tweeted at me directly. It was bizarre.
My fan theory for that, by the way, I don't know if I ever told you this, Chris, is that Topher Grace wanted to be young Solo and had a Google News alert on the project and had never deleted it.
Well,
that is so far within the realm of possibility that's Like I'm just gonna believe that's what happened.
But I'm honestly, I was very humbled by it because his history with Star Wars recuts and editing and that, like, I love that he appreciates kind of approaching, okay, how does it work? And like, it seems like he's not, he's made his extreme recut of the prequels, which isn't to say like, this is the definitive, this is how it should have been, but
it's like a dream supercut of all three films.
Well, it's him also exploring like, what are the things, why are things not working? And it's not saying like, oh, this is fixed, but like, this is a like sort of, it's almost like therapy.
An attempt to mitigate the problems.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and announce it here. We've kind of thrown it around and it's been cooking for a while, but we've got after that, we've got a very special combo Wes Anderson, P.T. Anderson thing coming up that should last us another year and a half, 2 years. And I'm really looking forward to diving into those films and getting Jake to kind of reassess Paul Thomas Anderson as a director. That's my goal.
Two of my favorite directors of all time. Two completely different directors. So that's
completely
exciting.
Different. But that's the thing. Like, as we've been discussing it, it's amazing how much they complement each other in strange ways. So like, I think that'll be an interesting journey to see sort of how, because they come from about the same era and came up in sort of a similar way, but have taken such different paths. It should be a whole lot of fun and very interesting and a lot of great discussion coming up there.
Give me Bill Murray and the Wilson brothers in a PTA film. There we go. I would enjoy that. All right, well, Chris, well, that sounds very exciting. So if you guys do us that favor, and we'll put their information in the show notes, but give them a follow and subscribe to their show because they are creating spectacular film content than Mike and I when it comes to that sort of area of expertise, which is, we talk Star Wars, so.
Or we pretend to be at the very least.
Well, welcome to podcasting. That's all of us. So.
All right, so that'll do it for this episode of the Canon Cantina. Check out our new website, thecanoncantina.com, for links to all of our social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, our Discord server. Got some pretty funny bios for the hosts. I do say so myself because I wrote them myself, so you should check them out. You can also check out our watch page where you can watch Jesse suck at Battlefront, and you can listen to the show there as well. Be sure to check out the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Podbean, Podcast Addict, YouTube, Spotify, Twitch, wherever podcasts are found.
All the places. And keep spreading the word of our show, guys, by subscribing, rating, and reviewing. Once again, if you think we can do something better, we're always ready to listen to that. So email us at canoncantina@gmail.com or tweet at us or any of the social medias at the Canon Cantina. As you guys know, we got a lot coming in the future that we're excited to tell you about. So just stay tuned for that. And join us next week as we start the Jedi Academy trilogy, which was, of course, one of the most pivotal elements of the Star Wars Legends storyline as a 3-part trilogy that, guess what, talks about Luke starting a Jedi Academy and, spoiler alert, having some students do bad things, very Ben Solo-esque. Obviously, the veins of story are showing up again in modern day canon. So we're really thrilled to talk about that. Just join us then.
That'll do it for us here in the Canon Cantina today. Cheers, everybody.
May the Force be with you.
Boring conversation anyway.